Welcome back, friends, fellow philosophers, and listeners, to this Wild Isle author interview. I have with me a longtime friend and I was about to say schoolmate, but that makes it sound like we were in elementary school together. Uh, grad school cohort companion, Brad Huestis. So, how are you doing, Brad?
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. For those of you who don't know Brad, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us, mini biography, what you write, what you do. Yeah, that sort of thing.
My name is Brad Huestis, as you said. I'm the author of Ahab, a hockey story, and of The Big Bad, which just came out on Tuesday. And you and I, as you mentioned, we met in the MFA program at the University of Tampa. And doing the math, it seems like we met 8 years ago and parted ways face to face working 6 years ago. But we've kept up over the years via social media and whatnot. So I've admired your writing from afar, and yeah, I'm glad it's been mutual.
Yeah, it's really great to have stayed connected. It happens so often that, once you go your separate ways of an institution that people just vanish into the ether, especially because we did a low residency program. So it's not like we were full time in the same space. It was in 2 week sessions, rather intense. Uh, so yeah, I'm really grateful to be able to stay connected and to be able to keep reading your work. And I'm really grateful that you reached out to me. Actually, it means a lot that someone would care to ask me to read their work. So thank you for that opportunity to read The Big Bad. I really appreciate it, Brad. Um, with that being said, we'll go ahead into the first of all questions. So, what I like to do with these author interviews, Brad, is to dig as far back at the beginning as I can. And the question I always ask is, what is it that very, very, very first got you to decide that you were going to try writing at all, right? So that mean that's not like not the event that got you to write your first book, though it might be that event, but the idea that pushed you toward being an author ever in the first place.
So my earliest memories would have been as a child, like learning to read, even like grade school type work, and just greatly admiring the authors, being in awe of their world building and their ability to tell stories. And you know, at that age as a kid, like everything is magical. And like you're hearing people who have been dead for 200 years tell a story. So that in that sense, they're time travelers. So it was just a magical experience. And to this day, I still love being in libraries. I love being in bookstores. And now I'm thrilled to be a part of the people on the writing side of the equation.
Mm. My first thought is to ask, what is it that you were typically reading as a child? And has it changed? I mean, I'm sure it has changed over time, but how has it changed if it has?
Oh, that's a great question. So, so you remember back when we were studying at Tampa, like one of the big struggles is trying to identify and develop your writer's voice. And one of the things I did was I put together my top 10 list of favorite novels. And they were books like Starship Troopers, Animal Farm, Dr. Moreau's Island, To Kill a Mockingbird. And so they were pretty wide shot group as far as topics and times and places. But the one thing they all had in common was they were very close. They were either first person point of view or they were a very close third person point of view. So what I got from that for myself was what I really liked was being inside the skull of a character and developing the empathy for the way they see the world and the way they work their way through issues presented in the book.
Okay, so for you, it was really the narrative perspective that was the, let's say, cornerstone of the development of voice. I too got a lot of development of voice, not advice, mentoring during the program. See, and for you listening, this is probably going to get maybe a little bit nerdy on the the academic composition side of things, the craft side of things. But bear with us for just a moment because um, when you were going through your list, what what I noticed amongst those stories that I see reflected in your own work is a very, let's say, I would say, I was about to say conversational. That's not exact. Doesn't exactly capture it. A clear prose, right? Like, for those, and you would have suffered this as well, Brad. My work is rather influenced by extraordinarily dense and flowery, and at times difficult language makes it a little bit inaccessible. When I read your work, that it's on the other end of the spectrum, right? It comes in with like you mentioned Orwell and Animal Farm, right? Like that's a I mean, I would even argue Heinlein is very much this way too, right? Where
Hmm.
you've got this personable delivery. There's the word I'm looking for, personal delivery. Is that something that when you were going at the University of Tampa, when we're getting our MFAs together, that was part and parcel of that narrative perspective? Because I can imagine the reason why I ask that is I can imagine to be that close in a way it lends itself toward the personal prose as opposed to something more, um, let's say, grandiose. Is that right, or am I totally off base there?
No, I think you're right on base. I mean, for me, that kind of preference developed as a reader, and then it carried over into writing. But I think you're spot on. For me, I'm drawn to very strong characters and very strong stories. Like if I had to choose between Hemingway and Faulkner, I would choose Hemingway every time. So yeah, I think you're spot on.
That is a really great dichotomy too, because I'm the Faulkner guy. If I had to pick between the two of them, um, yeah, that'll make for an interesting conversation. So we've got your initial reading influences. Um, Now, in terms of because what you focused on there was perspective, and then I brought in kind of prose style. But there's also an element of what the internet's going to consider to be genre, what I think of as more of setting. And I've read your two books, and I see a lot of what Jason Ocker talked about. I want to know, actually, I'll ask you this. Do you still remember him talking about thick and thin ice by chance?
I don't. I
No?
was
Oh, no.
unlucky. I didn't have Jason Hoffman. He was
Oh,
my second thesis reader, but I never had him as an advisor. So
no, I must be misremembering. I swore you were in one of our workshops. I apologize for that mismemory. Um, well, I'll say this. From reading your works, it seems like you would have been there. Maybe that's why I assumed that you had been, or I implanted you into my memory, into those workshops, because for both of your works, you do a technique, right? And the technique is you start on thick ice. This is writing about something with which you are, as a person, as an author, are very familiar, and you use that thick ice to create what I would term now like a high level of verisimilitude. Verisimilitude just being making it's similar to life, right? Because we're writing words on a piece of paper. But when you create that high degree of narrative, verisimilitude, you create also narrative authority. It's also something I picked up from Jason, who I'm very grateful for. And it seems like you use that technique to then venture outward into new and novel experiences. And that seems especially the case with the big bad. Um, you know, is that, rather than me ask, like, is that just part of your process? I'll expand the question because I want to know about your process, right? So let's make it a story. You're, or I guess there's a question. When did you start writing stories, and then how did your process of writing stories and your experience of writing stories change when you got to the University of Tampa and after? So there's a kind of before, during, and after the process of Brad's process of writing. um, you can answer that however you see fit.
so your simple question, when did I start writing stories, is a bit of a trick question, or at least it's a trick answer. Um, so I practiced law for boy. 30 years in the military, first as a judge advocate and later as a civilian attorney. So one could argue that from the very first day I was writing stories, because arguing law starts with facts. First, you argue the facts and then you argue the law. Of course, you have to go around and interview people, and you can't color too far out the lines. Your stories are a bit constrained by reality, but not as much as you would think. So, so that's when I started. But when I got to University of Tampa, that's when I was, free to explore the artistic side of things and and delve deeper into pure fiction. But I guess the habits I developed as an attorney in developing cases and interviewing witnesses and shaping it into an opening statement or a closing argument all come into play when now I'm writing Ahab or the Big Bad. It's the same process for me.
And that hasn't changed ever since. It's just been the same.
Well, I hope I've gotten better over time, especially with the help of the pros at University of Tampa. One of the funny things is about halfway through the program at Tampa, I was like, wow, I wish I would have done this 15 years ago. I would have been a much better trial attorney because, but well, you play the hand you're dealt. So um,
Yeah,
but
no,
um,
I
but
understand
yeah,
that.
no, what you mentioned about Jason and the thick ice, thin ice, I've never heard it put that way before. I think it's perfect. The way I've heard it put is write what you know, and that's what I've tried to do.
Yeah. So when I read your first book, Ahab, to get specifically into your books, I thought like, man, this guy? I actually think it does say, were you a paratrooper? Am I remembering that right? Because I know there's some heavy overlap between parts of the protagonists, let's say, life positions or occupations in either of the novels. I didn't realize that you were a trial attorney. Uh, so that fits right into the big bad. We'll get into that, but. Um, uh, do you mind going a bit into your military history? Because my understanding is you're a veteran.
Correct. Yeah. So I went to college through an ROTC scholarship. I went to Arizona State, and then once I graduated, I went to well, while I was in school, I went to airborne school, so that's when I became a paratrooper. Um, and then after graduation, I went to field artillery school and ranger school. And then I went to my first assignment in Germany as an artilleryman. After that, I shifted gears. I went to law school. And then after law school, I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I was assigned to 18th Airborne Corps, so back to the airborne. Um, and yeah, I spent 20 years in the military, mostly in either Fort Bragg, Germany, or deployed to Bosnia and deployed to Iraq.
Yeah, and you can definitely see that, like I said, come across particularly strongly in Ahab. Um, so after I had read Ahab, so the maybe the most minor of spoilers, the protagonist suffers an injury early on in the book, and ends up with a prosthetic leg. Um, and after that, my immediate thought was like, wait a minute. I never actually bothered to look. Did Brad have a prosthetic leg? And so then this time wondering, I've been sitting here like racking my brain. Now, obviously, it was Florida. Probably you had shorts on, and I should remember whether like that you didn't. But my brain wants to input that in. But for the listeners, I don't know. I don't want to say like if you do you have like a prosthetic leg, or am I what how much of that is implanting my fantasies over the reality of the 2 week stints that we spent together?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and believe it or not, I get asked this question quite frequently, and it's even been some of my hockey players because I coached the post team in Bavaria, the army team. Some of my players have asked like how I relearned to skate with a prosthetic leg. But both in Ahab with Foley as the main character and in The Big Bad with Gilbert as the main character, both those characters are 100% fiction. So going back to your thick ice, thin ice, Will Foley was skating on thin ice because he was a complete fictional character. So nobody lost a foot for the making of
Yeah.
Ahab.
It is amazing, don't you think? Especially as I'm sure this kind of relates to your experience as a lawyer. Like you read a story, and then suddenly like even memories start to change to fit with the story that you've heard. It's quite impactful. I guess that leads naturally to the question. When you're writing your fiction, Brad, what do you hope to? The way I frame this is going to be a weird way to ask this, but I say it this way in particular to get a particular response. What do you hope that your fiction does to and for the person who reads it?
Well, first of all, I want to entertain. I mean, that's fiction needs to entertain because you want to reach an audience. Um, but the second thing I'd like to do is generate empathy for people that were there. I want them to say, "Yeah, that's exactly how it felt." And for people who were never there, I want them to say, "Wow, now I understand. That's how it must have felt." So one is entertain, two is empathy, and the third is, and this is a distant third, is to get up on a soapbox and maybe preach a little about an issue. And I'll be the spoiler this time. In Ahab, the thing that I was trying to highlight and preach about was suicide and soldier suicide in particular, because as you probably recall from the story, the two roommates um, have similar situations. They're going through the same process, being kicked out of the military because of their injuries, and one makes it through and one doesn't. And I tried to draw the dichotomy between the two as a way to illustrate some of the struggles that our veterans face.
Yeah, well, that answers the question. One or half of the question I wanted to ask is like, hey, what do you want to preach about? I actually think in Ahab that was done really well. I wouldn't even call it preaching in Ahab at all, because while that is an element of the story, I didn't feel when I read Ahab that I was being beaten over the head with that, right? When a lot of times when someone has a particular agenda, they do feel like they're beating you, beating you to death with it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I that is the case. We have someone who has a different attitude, um, where Folly's attitude is to kind of try to work through and to persevere, and the things you can read for yourself how things go for him. Readers out there, so go pick up a copy of Ahab. But he makes it more than, or makes it through better than his roommate. I can say that. In the big bad, what was the what was the issue that is pressing there, if there was one?
Well, yeah, there were many. So the big bad, it's strange because I started writing it in 2021, and at the time I started writing it, the issues were not very timely. The first issue was women in the military because Major Gilbert, as the protagonist, she has a tougher deployment than the men who deploy with her, just because of her gender. So the gender roles in the military. Um, in 2021, that wasn't such a big deal because more and more positions were opening up for women. So it was almost going to be kind of like a historical look where we came from. But now the current policy in the Department of Defense is again to limit the role of women in the military. So now an issue that wasn't so timely all of a sudden is very timely. Another issue is adherence to the law of war and the rules of engagement. Um, the U.S. Has always been a leader in the international community in developing the law of war, in fostering a military culture of adhering to the rules of engagement. Um, so again, it was kind of a footnote or kind of a throwback to Lieutenant Calley in Vietnam type scenario. But now the Department of Defense has issued guidance to commanders that law of war training is no longer mandatory, that it's discretionary for commanders whether they want to train the law of war or not, which for me as a former combat arms officer and now as a former military lawyer, it's just to me mind blowing. So now all of a sudden, those two topics of women in the military and law of war and rules of engagement training all of a sudden are very, very timely.
Yeah, do you know the year that they you might have just mentioned it, I might have blown past me, but the year that they stripped away the requirement for law of war training?
It was just this year. It's the current
I was just
administration.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, what like my, that does seem quite bizarre. It seems to be not even a partisan political point that you could make. Like the question in my mind immediately is like why? Well, I mean the obvious answer why is like, well, we plan on committing atrocities of war soon. Like that's like the obvious reason. But why do you think that change happened? Not to veer too far away from the book, we'll veer right back in after.
Yeah, no, I mean the media reports have kind of expounded upon it, but the idea is that our soldiers shouldn't go into hostile environments with their hands tied, that they should be able to go in and operate freely. Commanders should be able to go in and operate freely without the worry of being held criminally liable for crimes after the fact. Um, which I think is just a polished way of saying exactly what you just said. But,
Yeah.
well, yeah, but it gives them a blank check to, do terrible things. Um, and another thing in the big bad is the fallout of what happens after that, to the perpetrators, the trigger pullers, and also to the order givers, who set the stage for these atrocities to happen.
Yeah, that was something that you did really well in The Big Bad is to show the complexity, um, particularly in regard to the law and then who is legally responsible and to what degree that person can be held to account, even if, you know, even if you could get someone, whether it's in the letter or the spirit of the law, there are, let's say, Machiavellian factors. Now, you mentioned you did law for a long time, and you were also in the military for a long time. You might have again said this, and it might be something just blazed past, or blazed, burned away, drifted away. Sometimes a bird just flieth away. There we go. Let's use Nietzsche for that. So was there an overlap with your law practice and your time in the military? Like, did you serve as a military lawyer?
I did, yeah, yeah, I did. So I started my first 5 years were as an artilleryman and then law school, and then I came back and my last 15 years were as a uniform judge advocate. And then I've served another 16 years as a civilian attorney for the Army. So 30 years.
And did you find that I guess the answer is probably going to be yes, right? But the way that the level of degree of Machiavellianism in the institutions, was that also your actual personal experience? Because we definitely see it in the big bad. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a story if there wasn't, right? But is that really the story that we're seeing out in real life?
That is the thick ice. That is absolutely the way it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just tragic. You know, I suppose that's the way it's always been. I don't know that there's been a time where, um, you know, the powerful do not play power games and obey their rules. Um, so let's dig in further because you mentioned way at the beginning of this interview that your focus is on narrative perspective. You want to both yourself experience somebody else's experiences, I suppose, but then you want your reader to be able to join you in that journey into a different kind of mind. So, and we could either stick with the big bad, or we can jump between your works, or if you've got any other works that you haven't published but you've written that you could reference, you can go into those as well. But I want to know about the thin ice a little bit more. Like obviously we know, like okay, so your leg is intact, you did not suffer a disability, so that's obviously thin ice, so that's different. But what other ways have you been able to explore? What would be to you novel novel life experiences through your characters. And I guess we could, if we want a starting place, we can start with Major Gilbert, Jessica, as I have her in my head.
Yeah, so she's the perfect example of what you're talking about. So when I first started drafting The Big Bad, the protagonist was a male character. Um, and there were a couple problems with that. And I drafted half the novel, so I was quite a ways in when I started realizing the problem. And the first problem was it was kind of a flat story. It was a little bit boring because all the main characters were male. So there wasn't a extra dimension. But the other problem was I was the Chief of Justice for the multinational core Iraq in Baghdad in 2006. And so as a writer, I kept drifting back to my experiences, and it ended up kind of being a memoir. Um, and um, it was writing is therapy, but it wasn't going to interest readers. And um and then I don't remember how the thought came about, but the thought of changing the main character to a female just made everything click because it added a big dimension of women in the military, and the different issues they face. And so that empathy, it wasn't my experience anymore. Now I had to imagine what her experience would have been like. Um, and it just made the story just much more interesting, I think.
And to dig into particulars of process? So you decide, okay, run into this issue. I need to change the protagonist. We're going to be no more a kind of mirror of me for a memoir-esque novel. It's going to be a story about a um, Latina lawyer in the military. Uh, how do you start that out, right? Because it's got to be immediately that you're like, okay, now I can't be me anymore. How do you get into that other person's head?
So I just went back to the beginning and started rewriting. Um, and so as I rewrote, I would hit sections where her interior thought would be vastly different than the interior thought that I had down for a male character who thought just like me. So it was quite a bit of work to go back. It probably took a good 6 months to go back and rewrite the beginning and then continue from that midpoint on with Gilbert in the driver's seat instead of the male version of the character.
Yeah. Is there anyone that you were corresponding with to try and like is this a pure empathetic exercise? Like, are you sitting here, okay, let me imagine what this must be like based on what I know and who I know? Did you have anyone who you're corresponding with saying, hey, I haven't had these experiences. What are your experiences like? Did you have like a history of that you could refer to? You know, I guess that's what I'm asking is what how did you how did you approach your empathetic character or characterization, creating Jessica for this story?
Yeah, no, I was very, very fortunate. So I finished the first draft of the novel before I reached out. But once I finished it, I reached out to several people, and one was a lady named Denise Vowell, who was a retired colonel, and she was my staff judge advocate, my boss in Bosnia. And I reached out to Mickey Miller. She's also a retired colonel who was my staff judge advocate in Baghdad. And then I had a colleague at work that we both served in Iraq in 2006. We were actually on the same base, Victory Base. Um, and we figured out that we did meet at one point, but neither of us really remembered it clearly. But she put it best. She said she would read through my manuscript and look for scrunchies. She was referring to a episode of Sex in the City where a writer wrote something about the New York women wearing scrunchies, and he got crucified because real New Yorkers don't wear scrunchies. So that was her inside joke. She would search for the scrunchies, but all three of them came back with fantastic feedback in different places. One of the best was Colonel Vowell, Denise Vowell. I had a passage where I talked about Gilbert had to work up her female pride, and Vowell had circled that. and said pride has no gender. She either has pride or she doesn't. So that was easy. You just delete the word female. But as a male, I was pretty proud of that turn of phrase. I thought it was a very clever, like I thought, oh look, I'm a wordsmith. But I got very direct feedback of no, that is a scrunchie. You need to remove that. So I had that help, but it was all on the back end. It was after the first draft was complete.
Okay, so yeah, you just got to strip out those little um, mishaps. Well, that's good. You didn't have to go back and, rewrite the whole thing or because I've done that before and that's quite a miserable experience. You mentioned scrunchies. So like I imagine again, the answer to this might really be yes, but it shocks me to this day. There's a scene describing officers coming in and uh I think they're coming onto the base and they've got to uh, essentially unload their firearms and they do like a blank test to make sure like you've actually cleared the chamber. Now, for those of people listening, like I'm West Virginia and we like everybody has guns. Like it's like the very I don't know if you've seen the goofy like NRA rituals of like drop the magazine, clear the chamber. You show it to somebody, you hand them the gun, they open it up to make sure the chamber's clear, and then they show like that level of safety precaution is what I'm mostly used to around here. And then I mean, I can believe it, but to hear like there are, let's say, accidental discharges or negligent discharges so much, so frequently that they have a, fire into this bucket of sand test to make sure people are actually doing that. Like that, is that I'm assuming that's for real. Like that's actually an issue that they have over in places of deployment across the world. Is that the case? Is the
Yeah,
firearm
that's that's
safety?
that's that's thick ice. Yeah, in Baghdad we are in yeah, in Baghdad we probably had one a week. It was at the chow hall. They'd have the clearing barrels at the chow hall, and that's when you'd hear a live round go off. And the same in Bosnia. So, across time, across places, about once a week, we'd have a negligent discharge.
That's amazing. Just jumping into to empathizing a little bit here because you've got the experience with that, and it's just of peculiar interest to me. Uh, you know, I want to ask simply, like, why do you think that is? Um, but it might be backwards. Maybe it's just that because I live out in the woods, it's I'm the where I live is the freak occurrence, and that everywhere else, uh, people are less cautious with weapons. I don't know. Uh, yeah, do you think it's just part of human nature to be negligent with dangerous objects?
Well, I think it's just a level of complacency. Probably early in the deployment, there's less negligent discharges, but as the deployment goes on, it becomes more frequent because people just become less observant, more complacent. And the ones who tended to come up more often were the more senior people, the senior NCOs and the officers, but that was because they carried a sidearm, so a 9 millimeter pistol. And the big difference there is when if the magazine is in the well, so it's in the handle, so you're really not paying attention. It's up in the handle, you don't see it, and you pull back the charger to look into the chamber, it's empty. But when you let it go, it charges a round. So now the round is in the chamber, and when you pull the trigger to dry fire and prove your weapon's empty, you shoot a live round into the sand and make everybody's day. Um,
Yeah.
whereas with the long guns, with the M16s or the M60s or any of the longer weapons, the magazine is out and exposed, and either you're going to see it or your buddy's going to see it and nudge you with the elbow and say, "Hey, take your magazine out." But it's the same thing when you pull the
Yeah.
charging handle back. You observe the chamber; it's empty, and if you let it go forward with the magazine in, it's going to chamber around.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I run through this drill with my 6-year-old stepdaughter. Um, so like, and she doesn't mess it up. like in terms of like I'll ask her like I'll pull the magazine out and then I'll like ask her, is this empty? And like at this point she was like, well, I don't know because you have to look. So the but I wanted to ask about that complacency and it going up the rank because that sounded like to me was Michael Wolff, right? So I imagine that, or I'll frame this as this question: do you think that that kind of complacency, which can lead to a lack of observation in something as rote and small scale as like, did you remember to take the magazine out first before you, check to see that the chamber was clear? Do you think that that level of lack of observance essentially goes up the rank to, let's say, checking to make sure there are no civilians in a location where there should you think there's combatants? Do you think that that's like the same level of complacency, or do you think something else is going on there that motivates characters like Michael Wolff?
Yeah, no, I think that's apples and oranges. I think, the complacency, the inattention to detail, that's just sloppiness. Of course you don't want that, but there's no evil intent. There's no desire to harm. But I think the example you just used of Wolf, like making sure there's no civilians on the battlefield, um, that's a little different because that's intentional. His motives are pure. He's doing it because he believes that aggressive soldiers are more likely to return home safely. But he's breeding that aggressiveness. He's making a choice. He's saying, if we go out there and we're the toughest and the meanest and we are always on the offensive, then we're going to go home safely. And so he's made a decision to put others at risk to minimize the risk to himself and his own guys, which it's not pure evil. I mean, that's the position to take. And if you're in charge, that's yeah. But um to be as depicted in the big bad, to be so extreme about it, that you end up putting your soldiers in positions where they're forced to do things that will stay with them the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I guess what made me make that connection was that I looked at Wolf's decision, and Wolf's decision seemed to be hinged on the fact that he got really dubious intelligence that he like should have doubted, like he should have double checked, but that because the intelligence gave him license to go forward, right? It's like, okay, if I assume this is true, then actually everything I'm saying will be justified because there won't be any blunders. Of course, the blunder is assuming that the intelligence was correct when we later, find out in the novel that I mean, this isn't even a spoiler, it's just true. Like when you get rumors don't tend to be accurate a lot of the time. Hearsay is not, let's say, evidence in a court of law, if my understanding is right. So, but am I reading too much into that with Wolf? Because that's what I got from him. He seemed like he was like, I suffered like this blunder in the past. People got killed. Um, I want to take this extreme approach because this is how I'm going to guarantee that at least my people are less likely to get shot. Obviously, he's not thinking about the legal ramifications that fall on people after the fact. But that was the thing that stuck in my mind was, oh, okay, like his whole defense of himself rests on the intelligence he received being um, something that he should or should not have trusted. Am I reading too much into that, Brad?
No, I think you picked up on the main topic is he heard what he wanted to hear. He and his staff, they wanted so badly to fight the terrorists in a face-to-face um, scenario rather than the terrorists always hiding in the shadows and attacking and slipping off into the darkness. They wanted to just find them, confront them, and kill them. Um, and so they heard what they wanted to hear. They went out and they found informants. They went out and did recons, and they basically built a case by finding the pieces to fit together to fit their desires. That was one piece of it. The other piece I think that really pushed things over the edge is they wanted a strike package to prep the battlefield before they landed to basically mop up afterwards. Again, to protect the troops from exposure of being shot or killed. Um, but it was denied by hire. And so Wolf and his staff felt betrayed. Like, hey, we're the ones going into harm's way. And at the last minute, just before they're getting ready to take off in the helicopters, hire says, "Oh, by the way, you're not getting that strike package." And I think the way the staff phrased it is, "What? They're making us go in naked?" And so Wolf's solution to the problem is, well, when we land, we're going to kill everybody. We're going to shoot first. We're not going to wait for anything. We're going to lay waste and kick indoors and lead with grenades and all the rest. Um, and things go very badly from there.
Yeah. Um, Talking about Wolf. So Wolf's chapters are in third person and Jessica's are in first person, um, which I think is interesting because you talked about narrative perspective, and obviously, first and third, that's point of view, but those two are, perspective and point of view are, directly related to one another in significant ways. And so I wanted to know your authorial intention behind that shift between, Mike gets a few chapters and I'm pretty sure they're always in third person. Did you have anything in mind when you made that perspective and point of view shift between the protagonist and antagonist?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Wolf's always in the third person. Um, what nobody would know, except for the fact that you've asked a very perceptive question, is I first drafted the whole novel in the first person, Gilbert's chapters and Wolf's chapters, and I quite liked them. I thought that Wolf's chapters read as strongly, maybe in some places stronger than Gilbert's chapters. Um, but when I sent the manuscript out to beta readers for feedback, um, they were confused. They didn't know when the chapter started with "I saw, I did, I talked, I did whatever." They didn't know if it was Gilbert or Wolf, and so it just led the readers to be very confused. So I had to go back and rewrite the Wolf chapters into the third person just to clear up the confusion. So a lot of trial and error. Even in my second
Yeah.
book, I still had to go back and rewrite major
I wouldn't even
portions
call that
as
an Wouldn't call that an error. I just think you're kinder, kinder than
it.
I am. I would have told people like, pay attention. But that also perhaps would not make for as smooth of a read for most people.
Yeah.
Because honestly, like I would like to see that first draft because it does, for me, I enjoy really, really high degrees of moral complexity. And if you slip into Wolf's perspective, where you want to believe the bad intelligence from Wolf's perspective, it's not going to be clear. Actually, I mean, it still kind of wasn't clear until you get to see things from Jessica's side that the information was as bad as it was, right? Because then we get the information like, no, we get these rumors all the time. They're almost always exaggerated. Like we can't trust them almost ever. Which obviously he should have known that. But I would have liked to see that original draft, but that's me personally. Um, but yeah, one thing I did notice, I want to know if you notice this too. Um, if we combine your three purposes, right? So you want to entertain, so you've got that. That's like the plot, the story, the characters. But then you also have the empathy, and that gets covered pretty well by the first person, personal prose style narration, where you can dig deep into somebody else's experiences. And then you have a little bit of the soapbox, and just out of a purely technical perspective, actually, I did find that if you want to frame your argument and narrative, it is actually quite effective to do that with that. Obviously, you just told me that wasn't the intention. That was just you wanted to make the plot clear so readers don't get confused, and fair enough on that. But do you see, or after the fact, does it make sense to think that actually it actually helps that third purpose a little bit because we get a deep dive and empathizing and sympathizing with Jessica, but by putting Mike at third person, it makes it slightly more difficult to sympathize with his position, right? Because it's a little bit of psychic distance, right? You're still pretty close. You still kind of get the narrator narrating on his thoughts, so you're not totally away from him. But do you see the utility there of having that you kind of pulled off there, where it's the first person really does allow or entice the reader to sympathize a little bit more with Jessica than Wolf, maybe Wolf.
I do, and I didn't really it didn't cross my mind until I read your review. You wrote a very thoughtful review, and that was a piece of the review. And I remember reading it and thinking, he's right. He's exactly right. I wasn't clever enough to come up with it myself, but MarQuese nailed it. It's a very clever thing. But I stumbled upon it by luck. It was not by design. So thank you for giving me the credit in your kind review. But but it was great. No, you're exactly right.
Well, I'm still very much a union dude. You probably heard me talk about that enough at the university, but I don't attribute it to luck. Somewhere deep down, you knew it, and now you get the the words for it, so you get to take credit because that is actually a technique that could be used, right? Like especially if you want to explore a darker character. Perhaps even darker than Wolf if you really wanted to, because Wolf isn't entirely unredeemable. You can understand he's a real person, right? Obviously, he's a fictional person,
Right.
but he's a real fictional person, and you can understand how someone gets to that point of view. And first, I know some authors might be worried that they might accidentally give too much sympathy to uh, horrible figures, and so they are almost feel afraid to write three-dimensional villains because they don't want to risk giving that villain too much sympathy, right? But you show in the big bad. One of the ways that you can do that without too much of a worry is to do a point of view shift, and it makes it clearer to read for your readers. So that's a technique that we get to see firsthand in the big bad. So what other questions do we have? Are you working on anything? I mean, I'm sure that you are working on other stories, but is there anything outside of Ahab and the Big Bad that you might want to talk about?
Well, I am writing a third novel right now. It's about half drafted, and it's a hmm, let's see. It's tough to describe genres. I'll just tell you what the story is, and you can put the label on it. So it's a father moves his wife and kids to Barcelona to live the high life. They're high rollers, and he's telling everybody that he meets and comes across in Barcelona that he's a private equity trader. He was a special forces war hero. He got his MBA at Columbia. He traded on Wall Street. And he made so much money. Now they're in Barcelona, just living the good life. Um, but really, what's going on is he's going back to his hometown, New York City, and he's robbing jewelry stores to finance the high life in Barcelona. And the story, unfolds from there. So I'm having quite a bit of fun. And what you mentioned about, writing a darker character, a more evil character, because because Mike Wolf, you can say what you want, but his decisions make sense given his background, given his position. You can at least empathize and understand why he makes these decisions that turn out disastrous. Um, but in the new book I'm writing, the guy's just a bad guy. He's not. He's a grifter. He's a thief. But he's trying to hold it all together to continue to let himself and his family enjoy living an extravagant lifestyle overseas.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot of fun. As soon as you said he's going back and robbing jewelry stores, my whole face kind of lit up a little bit. I'm excited to see this next one. quite a bit actually. Thank you for letting us all know. So a question that came into mind. Um, I won't spoil the ending of any of the books, but I will say that your endings tend to be, um, let's say, you know, about as sweet as coffee with a little bit of milk and no sugar. I think that's like, uh, that maybe that doesn't hit the nail, or I guess you don't use a coffee mug to hit a nail on the head. But if you'll excuse the mixed metaphor there, um, you know, what when you wrap your stories up, when you come to the end, because that does say a lot about the theme, and by theme I mean like the thesis, the moral, the lesson that you want your reader to take home, or even if you don't really want them to, it's the lesson they will take home, the thing they'll learn about the world that the book is arguing is true about the world. Um, so when you finish your stories, I'll make it an open question. What's usually going through your mind? How are you feeling when you're doing that? Like, what's the for Brad Huestis, what is the process and the experience of ending your stories in the way that you do?
Hmm. So you're right. The endings of my books are pessimistic, which is odd because I'm generally an optimistic person, I think. But the stories kind of take on a life of their own. I plot my stories in advance, um, but somewhere around the halfway, two-thirds mark, I don't follow the plotting. The story just kind of ends itself. I get to know the characters. I kind of know what they're going to do, what feels right, what feels wrong. When I plotted Ahab, it actually had a very happy ending. Um, he ended up staying, he ended up marrying the girl, they had a child. It was a Disney ending. It was very happy. But as I got to know the characters and got to know better the story, that wasn't the right ending. I think the right ending was the one that it was published with, and that's he ends up going back home, and life kind of sucks, and he gets, everything goes wrong for him. But he goes home, and life isn't perfect, but surrounded by friends and family, it's still pretty nice. It was kind of the ending. Um, and with the big bad, Gilbert doggedly pursues the case, doggedly pursues justice, and she gets mixed results. The trigger pullers get punished harshly, and the decision makers not so much. But I think that's a reflection of real life. We see it all around ourselves every day, where there's a certain class of people that put themselves above the law, and why the rest of us put up with it, I just don't know. But it seems to cut across time. It seems to cut across cultures, and it's certainly at play in the big bad.
Yeah, so to you, this just feels like this is how things really end for the most part, right? That the trying to have a bit of um, realism, almost. I just heard this term a few weeks ago. I think it's realpolitik, which is just like real politics, which is a kind of evolution of like Machiavellianism for a global geopolitic. But yeah, that does feel like the ending of your stories do feel like they fit right into that the um, natural evolution, natural progression, there we go, of the series of events that the characters experience. Are we going to see a break from that in the new book, or do you suspect, because I'm sure you don't know, but do you suspect that it'll be you know can we root for this bad guy who's at least robbing robbing these banks, uh for him to get away with it in the end?
I hope so. This one might be the mirror image because, or the photo negative because I've plotted a very bad ending for him. So maybe as I write it, maybe the very bad ending won't feel right, and maybe he'll have a more happy ending. So,
Yeah.
but I'll have to finish it before I know.
Yeah, either way, there'll be a catharsis. Either he gets terribly punished, and we could say, "Ah, a bad guy who gets punished," yes, or he'll get away with it, and then maybe we could think, "Yes, now I can go rob a bank."
Yeah.
All right, Brad. Is there anything else in particular that you want to talk about, or something that maybe you wish people asked you during interviews like this?
No, I'd really like to wrap up by thanking you for the opportunity to reconnect and talk again. I know we really connected in Tampa, and enjoyed the time there. And it's great to be talking again. And I really enjoyed reading One Smoke, your latest publication with Cactus Man, the world
Yeah.
building and the interior thoughts of Cactus Man, of him eating his own bitter fruit. Um, you're the Faulkner, I'm the Hemingway, but I really enjoyed reading it. It's outside of what I would normally read, but because I know you, I read it and I really enjoyed it. So thanks.
Well, thank you for reading it, and I'm looking forward to reading more of your work as you publish. So the feeling is mutual. All right, friends. Oh, Brad, before we go, we got to tell people where can they get your stuff?
Everywhere. My publisher Kohler tells me that it's available at 10,000 outlets, which is hard to believe that there's 10,000, but the big ones, of course, are Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and whatnot, but really everywhere.
All right, well, we will link below for all of these who want to pick up a copy of Ahab or The Big Bad, and you can follow Brad as well. Are you on any social media where I should send people, Brad, that you'd like me to send them anyway?
Well, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, and yeah, I love hearing from folks, and I respond. So those are the two best places.
All right, we'll link those below as well. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for listening into this interview with Brad. It was a fun one. If you're still listening, you can check out my work as well. Wildoutlet.com is a website. I'm also over on Substack now, and I'm doing the rounds, showing that I'm releasing a story I've been sitting on for a number of years. It is called The Seventh Discourse. Discourse is in like Epictetus's discourses, is where I got the inspiration from. If you like a bardic philosopher, Conan-esque figure, you can check that out. They're releasing every week, piece by piece, till we get through the whole story. And I've got a bunch more. I'm going to end up releasing, should be 12 stories in that series. So you'll see publications there for a while. All right, enough shilling from me. Thank you guys for joining us. Pick up Ahab, pick up The Big Bad, and see you guys next time.